Hey, what's up? This is Harry Wagner from Harry's Situations, and today I want to talk to you about what you need to do for your new to you used vehicle in order to ensure you're not stranded on the side of the road. So we're going to talk about some basic maintenance, what sort of parts you would want to buy, and what you want to look for in order to ensure your vehicle is reliable for long trips. Now, I've owned about 30 vehicles in my life. Out of those, only one was new. I like to buy a vehicle, there's sort of a sweet spot where it's depreciated a little bit, you get more for your money, but it's not used up. So that's what we're looking for here. So the parts we have in front of us here are what we're going to install today. Altogether, this cost under $300. Some of them I bought at the local auto parts store, mostly the fluids. Other things I bought at Rock Auto. Now this video is not brought to you by Rock Auto. It's actually brought to you by Nitto Tires. Normally I wouldn't be wearing my nice new black Nitto t-shirt when I'm going to get all dirty. This is my Sunday shirt. This is the one I wear to church. JK, I don't go to church. My church is the Rubicon, so I actually do wear this shirt on Sunday. That part is true, but we're not gonna wear it when we're getting all dirty here in the garage. We're going to wear this Nitto shirt. I don't know how to segue out of that actually, so I should have thought further ahead. So we're gonna do an oil change. I'm partial to Wix filters, but you know, whatever brand you wanna use is okay. These 515s fit just about everything. I use them on my Jeep, I use them on the big block in my Ford, I use them on my Tundra. We're gonna flush the cooling system, change the coolant, we're gonna put on new hoses, we're gonna put in a new thermostat. We're not doing big things like the water pump, but this is a really good opportunity not only to change these parts, but say when we change the oil, we're gonna look and see, do we see any metal in that old oil that we take out? Do we have a leaking main seal or a leaking oil pan? In addition to the money we're spending, which is a pretty modest outlay, we want to look for any sort of issues in our new purchase to make sure that there aren't bigger looming problems that we want to address before we go on a long trip. And we're going to throw to the board. Now, if you're like me, you love lists. There's nothing more satisfying than just crossing something off when you complete it. So for this job, I've made a list of things that we're going to do. We're going to change the oil, the tranny fluid and filter, the transfer case fluid, and the diffs. We're going to do the coolant flush and change the radiator hoses. I've got a new Serpentine belt. This truck does not have a replaceable fuel filter. It's actually in the tank, so that's something I would normally do as part of this service. The brake fluid, so we're going to bleed the brakes. The steering fluid we're going to do, pro tip here, I just use a turkey baster, suck out as much as I can. It doesn't actually seem like it goes in here. Put in new fluid. I do that a few times. And then while I'm under the vehicle, I'm gonna look for anything that might be loose or missing, and I'm gonna grease the U-joints in the drive lines. So I have some tips for you. We wanna wear our eye protection. I like to wear gloves. I also like to use wheel chocks. Take your time. Use jack stands, don't just have the vehicle on the jack. Use a torque wrench. This is something I've learned from my friends that I go race with. They use a torque wrench on every fastener. You really want to take this opportunity with your new to you vehicle to look for anything that might seem out of place or could be a potential issue in the future before it bites you. So we're going to start by changing the air filter. You can get a stock replacement for 10 bucks. I got this K&N drop-in filter. So instead of just being flat, this K&N, three-dimensional, it's got more surface area so it can flow more air compared to the stock filter. Drops right down into the air box here. That's the easiest task we've got all day, no tools required. Now that we've got our air cleaner changed, we're still on this side of the engine, we're gonna flush this power steering fluid. Well, flush is probably a misnomer here. I just plan on draining as much as I can out of the reservoir, then I'll top it off. I'll do that again a couple times over the next week or two. This sort of minimizes our mess and is the easiest way to change our power steering fluid. So we're just gonna take this hose off here. We've got our pig mat under there, catch anything that might be errant and capture as much of this fluid as we can. Now ideally I would have done this fitting. It's lower than this one. It's going to drain more of our reservoir, but it also was going to be harder to capture the fluid without making a mess. That's what drove my decision here. You want to check how dark the fluid is, if it smells burnt. I mean, this looks like it was ready to be changed, but not terrible necessarily. The level wasn't low, so we don't have any reason to believe that there's any leaks. There weren't when we started. Hopefully there aren't when we're done. If you can see how clean the new fluid is going in compared to what we took out, we'll do that again a couple more times in order to flush the entire system. We'll do something similar with our brake fluid as we did with our power steering fluid, where I'm just going to suction out as much as I can. You can see this is pretty dark. It definitely needs to be changed, and then replace it. I still am going to bleed the brakes at all 4 corners and flush out the system that way, but this ensures not everything in the reservoir needs to travel through those brake lines in order to perform a complete flush. Now, brake fluid is one of the most caustic fluids in your vehicle. I definitely recommend wearing gloves for this. We're going to want to capture this fluid, and you don't want to get it on your paint because it'll eat right through it. Another good reason to change your brake fluid, even if it isn't dark, is that it's hydroscopic. So that means that your brake fluid actually absorbs water. Now when it does that, it's less effective because water boils at a lower temperature than brake fluid. So typically you want to start with a reservoir of brake fluid that's relatively new or is sealed, because if it's been sitting on the shelf for a year, your brake fluid will have absorbed water just like it does in your vehicle. Again, we got our pig mat here. Catch anything that might be errant. So interestingly, our reservoir is pretty low, but it still looks dark here, so maybe it's just staining in the reservoir. Fluid coming out, it's not exactly clear, but wasn't as dark as the reservoir led me to believe. Again, you want to be careful you're not spilling this. Next, we're going to change our spark plugs while the engine is still cold. I'm partial to NGK plugs myself, particularly on a Toyota. I looked up on the internet. For my application, these need to be gapped at 44 thousandths. I'm also going to put a little anti-seize on the threads here. With aluminum cylinder heads, this is a good habit to get into. You definitely don't want to cross-thread your plugs. So a little bit goes a long way. This is a relatively modern vehicle, so it has coil packs on each spark plug. So I just need to take those off. If it was an older vehicle with a distributor, I'd change the plug wires, the cap and rotor at the same time I'm doing this. We want to look at these plugs when we take them out, all 8, and look for things like if we see oil on them, that could be a sign that we've got a problem with rings or valve guides. Maybe there's getting oil in the cylinder. If they're black and covered in carbon, that can mean that we're overly rich. That's something else we're concerned about. Sometimes if they smell like coolant, that could be a sign that maybe you have a blown head gasket that isn't putting coolant into the oil pan, but it might be going into the cylinder. So those will typically be like whitish, but you'll just be able to smell that as well. So all of these are clues about how our engine is running. This one looks pretty good. Hopefully the other 7 do as well. That's a good sign. Now when I'm putting this new plug in, you don't have to go crazy here with how tight you get these. I'll always start it by hand. I do this with lug nuts too. I've had problems in the past where I didn't start things by hand and I cross-threaded them. We definitely want to avoid that. Don't be in a hurry. Feel that resistance, and that's when you're done. All right, on to the next one. Next, we're going to change the Serpentine belt. This is a Gates heavy-duty belt. I think Gates makes good products. If you're going through the time to change this stuff, it's worth getting high-quality components. Toyota, I think, is the gold standard, but they're pretty expensive. I think Gates makes a good product for the money. So there's actually a diagram here that shows our routing for our belt. There's a tensioner pulley I'm actually using my torque wrench. It's the longest ratchet that I have. So I'm just going to use that to relieve the tension here on this belt. And then I can pull it off. The old belt. If it's in decent shape, we'll keep it and use it for a spare. They don't take up much room in the truck. So we'll put it back in this packaging so we have the part number, because this one's so worn you can't really see the part number on it anymore. And we'll put this new heavy-duty Gates one on there. Routing this belt gets a little tricky. I know it's hard to see in here, I apologize. Not a ton of room to work with either, but step ladder comes in handy to get a little better positioning. And again, having a cold engine is helpful. You don't want to be doing this when it's hot if you can avoid it. One thing I like to do when I'm changing my oil at home is I'll take a paint pen. I'll write down the anticipated mileage for my next oil change on the filter. That way it's easy for me to tell when I need to do it next. So I'm going to drain the cooling system, fill it with water so I can use this radiator flush. And while that's doing its thing, we can go on to another step. So next, we'll take our grease gun here. I'm going to just climb under the vehicle here, put a little pump of grease in every U-joint in the driveline. Along the way, I'm going to kind of shake it, feel if anything feels loose, look for anything that seems out of place. So now we're going to do our coolant flush here. We drain the radiator. We're going to add this along with water to the system, then heat it up. Run it for about 10 minutes. We want to check for leaks while we're doing that. You know, these hoses, the water pump, things like that. I do not buy premixed coolant. I feel like kind of wasting your money. If you can get a gallon for the same price as half a gallon, this only costs $1.50 a gallon. So we're going to use distilled water for our flush and then also for our final fill. The truck did have red coolant in it, which is a good sign. I don't know that it was Toyota red necessarily, but I'm more partial to Toyota red coolant than I am to green coolant in these engines. One of the things we want to change is our transmission fluid. Toyota makes this pretty easy on you. They have a drain plug on here so we can drain the fluid from the tranny. And then we want to drop the pan. This kit has a new filter. It just seats up in there. There's a couple bolts that hold it in place. It comes with a new gasket. I like to lay these out ahead of time. If you put them in the sun, let them kind of flatten out, it'll help. When you fill the tranny, you just need a tranny funnel, and it's where you check the fluid in here with the dipstick. You want the vehicle running and in neutral when you check that fluid level. Put our jack stands to the frame here. Pull this wheel off. We'll take a look at our brakes and our suspension. I'll be excited when I'm pulling these wheels and tires off for good and putting some Nittos on. I've got some Black Rhino Chase wheels coming. They're a pretty lightweight flow form technology. Weight was a big factor for me when I was shopping. And I'm actually going with an 18. Nitto makes some tires that are basically a narrow 35 for an 18-inch rim. So that's my plan, to run that. Plenty of room for the brake package I have in mind in the future. Still enough sidewall to go off-road, but lightweight tire and wheel package. It should work well just about everywhere. So we flushed our fluid, but we haven't bled the brakes. If you have a friend with you, you can bleed all 4 brakes. On these, you also are supposed to bleed the proportioning valve in the rear. You want to start furthest from the master cylinder. We're closest to the master cylinder here, so we need to put jack stands under all 4 tires and wheels, pull them off, check the brakes. We've got our bleeder here. We can look at our suspension. I already know the suspension on this thing is pretty haggard. So this just has a spacer lift on it, and the irony is the truck's going to look very similar when I'm done, but the suspension will work much better once I add some coilover shocks. I want to add an auxiliary bypass shock, Total Chaos upper control arms. They're spindle gussets. You can see how tall this spindle is, so they're prone to bending. Total Chaos makes a bunch of other parts for the front of these and should be working good in no time. That's it for this episode. We got everything done on our list to ensure our vehicle is reliable and doesn't leave us stranded on the side of the road. Did I miss something though? Make sure and comment below and let me know. And let us know what you want to see next. I know what's next for me.
Thanks for watching Driving Line. If you guys like this video, consider subscribing to our channel so you'll never miss any of the content we create here. Whether you're into trucks, Jeeps, imports, domestic vehicles, or anything in between, we are here to fuel your passion. So hit that subscribe button and we'll see you guys next time.